The plains stretched like old parchment, cracked, brittle, and yellowing beneath the weary light of late afternoon. Sagebrush leaned westward in a wind that never stopped sighing, and a hawk hung above the ridgeline like a shard of copper pinned to the sky. Nothing moved but the dust, curling and uncoiling across the earth in long, silent breaths. A shack stood there, where no shack ought to be, leaning, bowed by time, with wood weathered gray and bleached nearly white along its southern face. One window was boarded, another gaped like an open wound. A rusted weather vane turned lazily atop the roof, though there hadn't been a storm worth naming in weeks. A single fence ran half-heartedly along the front, more symbolic than functional, and within it a man worked alone. He wore a hat that had forgotten the shape it was meant to hold, its brim frayed and heavy with sun. His shirt, faded blue, was patched in places with canvas and old flour sack. He moved with the slow, deliberate care of a man used to silence, someone who had forgotten how to hurry. In his hands was a hammer, in the other a nail bent just slightly, as though protesting its part in the day's repetition. He knelt by the fence post, tapped the nail in, then stopped, waited, listened. Nothing. Then a cough, faint. From behind the well, he stood, the hammer still in his hand. For a long moment, he didn't move. The sound came again, softer this time, like something coming loose from the ribs. Then a shuffle, a thump, and the heavy silence of someone collapsing. The man crossed the yard, boots crunching the thin gravel with the patience of someone who'd already lived through too much. Behind the stone well, half slumped in the dirt like a broken puppet, lay a boy. No older than 16, maybe, barefoot, shirt torn at the shoulder. A dark patch bloomed across his ribs, sticky and deep, like spilled ink soaking through paper. His eyes were closed, mouth slack. The man knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck. There was a pulse, light, erratic, but there. He breathed in slow, then exhaled through his nose like he'd made a decision he couldn't walk back. Without a word, he slid his arms beneath the boy and stood, bones protesting with quiet cracks. The boy groaned, but didn't wake. The man carried him inside. The interior of the shack was spare, a cot in one corner, a wood-burning stove at the center, and beside it a table with one chair. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall, face down. Light came through slats in the roof, thin blades of gold falling across the dusty floor. The man laid the boy on the cot, then crossed to a shelf and pulled down a basin, a jar of water, and a square of rough cloth. Outside, wind ran its fingers through the dry grass like a mother searching for a lost child. He cleaned the wound without ceremony, unbuttoning the boy's shirt, cutting away the blood-soaked parts. The bullet had passed through, clean but angry. Infection hadn't taken root, not yet, but the boy burned with fever. He poured whiskey into the wound, then wrapped it with a strip of flannel torn from an old coat. The boy whimpered, eyes fluttering. "Shh," the man muttered, not soothing, just instinctive. By nightfall, the boy slept again, curled slightly on his side like something wounded in the dark. The man sat by the stove, arms resting on his knees, eyes staring into the flames. The wind had died down, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the noise. From outside came the sound of a horse shifting. The man stood and walked to the door. His black gelding, scarred, patient, was tied to the fence post, head turned toward the horizon, ears twitching, listening. Something was coming. The man felt it too, though nothing showed in his face. He stepped outside, lit a cigarette with a match struck against his boot, and took a long drag. The smoke rose around his eyes, blurring the edges of the land. Behind him, the boy stirred. A whisper came from within the shack, a name maybe, or a prayer. Then, silence again. The man stood until the cigarette burned down to the filter. Then he crushed it beneath his boot, exhaled smoke through his nose, and went back inside. He did not sleep that night. Just sat by the fire, watching its glow flicker across the wood-grain walls. Every so often the boy would shift and mumble, his face slick with sweat. Once, he said a name, Tomas, and his voice cracked like an old bell. The man never asked who Tomas was. He just wrung out the cloth, wiped the boy's brow, and kept the fire from dying. Near dawn, as the sky turned the color of bruised peaches, the man stepped outside again. He did not see them at first, only the horizon, flat and endless. But the horse saw them, ears forward still as stone. The man narrowed his eyes. A thin blue line was coalescing on the road, uniformed, silent, unmoving, like a stitch holding the world together just before it tears. The soldiers had arrived. The boy did not wake with the sun. The morning was quiet but watchful, the kind of stillness that feels deliberate, not peace, but pause. Outside, the soldiers remained on the road, a crooked row of blue silhouettes drawn sharp against the rising light. Their presence was not urgent, not loud, no shouts, no commands, just there, like stones planted in the dust by a hand too patient for time. Inside the shack, shadows hung in corners that the light refused to reach. The fire in the stove had burned low, now just embers and ash. The man sat by the window, elbows on knees, his coffee cooling beside him. He hadn't touched it. The boy lay on the cot like something left behind, pale, damp with fever. His chest rose and fell in shallow intervals, each breath uncertain, like it had to decide whether it wanted to return. The man finally rose, slow as a hill waking from shadow, and crossed to the basin. He wrung out the cloth again and pressed it to the boy's forehead. The boy flinched, not in pain but memory. His lips moved. "Abe," he whispered, "tell her, I didn't mean—" The man didn't answer. He just turned the cloth and wiped the sweat from the boy's collarbone. The fever had deepened overnight. His skin was burning hot. The man's face, lined and stubbled with gray, remained unreadable, but a flicker passed through his gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt. He shifted the boy onto his side, checked the dressing. No fresh blood, but the skin around the wound was angry, swollen. He turned toward the shelf and pulled down an old tin box, rusted, edges dented. From within he drew a small glass vial, corked and wrapped in brown paper. He studied it for a long while before uncorking it, as if unsure whether the moment had earned its cost. Then he tilted the vial, measured 3 drops into a wooden spoon, and poured it between the boy's parted lips. The boy's throat moved, barely, and then he sank deeper into stillness, breath evening out just slightly. Outside, the horse stamped once, impatient. The man stood and walked to the door. Through a thin slit in the wall, he could see them, the soldiers. They had not moved. Not a word passed between them, but he felt their eyes, watching, waiting. One of them smoked a pipe. Another leaned on the barrel of his rifle, like a farmer resting on his plow. Their discipline was not strict but sure, the kind of men used to hunting something more than game. The man stepped back from the wall. He poured another cup of coffee and drank it cold. The hours dragged their boots through the dirt. Midday came without sound. The wind stirred once, lifting the edge of the boy's blanket, and then fell away. The shack creaked once, an old nail letting go somewhere in the bones of the house. Then the boy stirred. His eyes opened slowly, the color of wet stone, and unfocused. He blinked at the ceiling for a long time, mouth cracked and dry. When he finally turned his head, the man was already standing beside him. For a long stretch, neither of them spoke. Dust motes floated between them like ash. You ain't law," the boy rasped. The man said nothing. "You didn't turn me in." Still no answer. The boy's gaze shifted toward the wall. "How long I been out?" The man poured him water, held the tin cup to his lips. The boy sipped once, coughed, then managed a second drink. "There's men out there," he said quietly, voice trembling with heat. "In blue." The man nodded. "They come for me?" The man shrugged, just slightly. I didn't kill nobody. They think I did, but I didn't." The boy's voice cracked then, not with fear, but exhaustion. "I was just with the wrong ones. I didn't know they'd take it." The man turned, set the cup on the table, and reached for the bandages again. "Don't matter," he said, the first words he'd spoken since sunrise. The boy blinked, taken aback by the gravel in that voice. "Don't matter? You're here now," the man said. "Rest." He changed the dressing. The boy flinched again, but this time he gritted his teeth. There was something fragile in his stubbornness, like a foal trying to stand on broken legs. "I saw what they did. I tried to stop it. But they had guns. They killed a storekeep, took a ledger, some papers, said it was for a cause." The man paused, mid-rap. "They said it was for justice," the boy went on. "But they just left me. I didn't run fast enough. Caught a bullet when I turned to help." The man finished wrapping the wound and sat back. He looked at the boy, not with judgment, but with something more distant, as though remembering another boy, years ago, in another town, long since eaten by wind and time. "Doesn't matter why they're here," the man said. The boy watched him, waiting. "What matters is if you're ready when they come." Afternoon dimmed into evening and the light grew thick and gold. The soldiers remained unmoving. It was not a siege, not quite, but something quieter, a kind of verdict written in silence. The man stepped outside once to gather more water. His boots left deep prints in the earth, as if the ground itself were reluctant to let go of him. One soldier turned his head as the man walked back toward the shack. Their eyes met briefly. No words, no nod, just a moment of recognition. Two men long past their war, living in the quiet aftermath of other people's convictions. Inside, the boy had fallen asleep again. His breath rasped in and out, but steadier now. The man placed another log on the fire, stirring the coals. From the shelf, he pulled down a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a revolver. Old, maintained, but rarely used. A handful of cartridges lay beside it, dull with time. He did not load it, just looked at it for a long time. Then gently, he folded the canvas around the gun once more and set it beside the door. Night came, the wind returned, and still the soldiers waited. Dawn came without color, a gray hush that slipped across the prairie, like ash falling from an unseen fire. The wind had gone still again, and with it, the sounds of the land retreated into hiding. No bird calls, no stirring insects, only the hollow quiet of expectation. The man was already awake. He hadn't slept, not truly, only sat in his chair with the fire burnt low and a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. The boy had murmured in his sleep a few times, calling out to people who weren't there, names the man didn't ask about. One name had come up twice, Miriam. The boy had spoken it like a thread, unraveling from his throat, soft, almost hopeful, then terrified. The man rose when the light began to change, not fully bright, but just enough to turn the shadows on the floor into shapes. He stepped into his boots, pulled on his coat, and opened the door without sound. The air outside was crisp, dry, laced faintly with mesquite smoke from somewhere down the slope. And then he saw them, clearer now than the day before. The soldiers. There were 9 of them. Their coats were Union blue, or had once been, now faded with dust and sun. Some wore slouch hats, others kepis. Each one stood still, spaced evenly across the dirt road like fence posts, hammered into place. They said nothing. They didn't move, but every one of them was watching the house. Not openly, not with weapons raised. No tension in their shoulders, but their eyes followed the man's every breath. A sorrel horse whinnied softly from the edge of the line. One of the soldiers, a lean man with a beard as white as chalk, reached to soothe it with a gloved hand. The gesture was so casual, so human, it made the stillness of the others feel heavier. The man stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he stepped outside, boots in dust. He walked a few paces forward, just enough to be seen clearly, but not enough to invite response. The earth here bore no footprints but his. Even the wind seemed afraid to cross the soldier's path. He stopped, looked at them, each man, one by one. Then he turned and without a word walked back inside and shut the door. The boy was awake when the man returned, propped up weakly on one elbow, eyes glassy but alert. "They're still there, aren't they?" he asked, voice thinned by fever. The man nodded. The boy lay back slowly. His breath caught. I didn't think they'd follow me this far, he whispered. I thought once I got past the dry river, they'd lose the trail. The man didn't respond. He moved toward the stove, poured what was left of the coffee into a tin cup, and brought it to the boy. The boy tried to lift himself. His hands trembled. They're not here for justice, he said, after sipping once. They want what was taken. Ledger, names. It's not about me. The man knelt beside him. Where is it? The boy looked away. Gone. I left it in a creek bed. Thought it'd slow them down. A long silence followed. Dust settled gently in a beam of light falling through a crack in the roof. The man rose and crossed to the small trunk by the bed. From inside, he pulled a roll of cloth, which unwrapped into a series of supplies. Bread, salt, a worn canteen. He began to pack slowly. What are you doing? The boy asked, blinking through the heat. The man didn't answer. The boy shifted upright with effort, face drawn. You don't have to help me. I know. I don't deserve it. I know. The boy swallowed, throat dry. You were a soldier, weren't you? The man didn't look at him. There's a way you stand, like you've seen it before. That kind of waiting. The man tied the cloth and set it by the door. Then he took the old revolver from the shelf, unwrapped it, and placed it beside the bundle. Still unloaded, the boy watched him with eyes that held too much for someone his age. They'll kill me, he said, even if I give them what they want. The man turned then, finally, and looked at him. Then, don't give them anything, he said. Later that morning, the sun rose just enough to make the soldiers cast shadows, long and almost human. They hadn't moved, not a step. Their formation wasn't an attack. It was something stranger, a blockade without a battle, a warning without a voice. The man opened the door again. This time, the boy was beside him, leaning hard on the frame for support, wrapped in a blanket that hung over his shoulders like a cloak. They stood there together, saying nothing. The boy's breath was shallow, but steadier. He squinted at the line of men down the road. Why don't they come? He asked. They're waiting. For what? For you to break? The boy looked at him, eyes wide with the kind of understanding that takes root too late to matter. The man placed a hand on his shoulder, brief, heavy. Then he stepped down off the porch and walked to the horse tied by the rail. He checked the saddle, adjusted the stirrup. The gelding snorted and shifted, sensing the tension, but not afraid. They'd been through too much together for that. The boy watched. You gonna send me out there alone? The man didn't answer. He lifted the pack and tied it behind the saddle horn. Then he walked to the door, picked up the revolver, and finally loaded it, one cartridge at a time. He held it out to the boy. The boy stared at it, then at the man's face. I don't want to shoot nobody, he said, voice hoarse. You don't have to, the man said, but it helps to look like you might. The day stretched on. The sun climbed high enough to bleach the land. The dust lost its shadow. The soldiers still didn't move. Inside, the man sat at the table, cutting slices from a stale loaf of bread. The boy sat nearby, cleaning the revolver with a cloth, slow, careful, as if trying to earn the right to hold it. There were no more words, only the sound of oil against metal, of wind passing like breath through the slats of the shack, of time waiting to decide whose side it was on. And outside, the line of blue held, silent, still, like the end of a sentence no one dared finish. By afternoon, the land shimmered beneath a sheet of rising heat, the horizon blurred like a half-forgotten thought. Grass curled and browned beneath the weight of the sun. Even the flies seemed too tired to buzz. And still the soldiers stood on the road, a line of men that might have been statues, if not for the flicker of cigarette tips or the occasional shift of a shoulder. Inside the shack, the boy slept again, though it wasn't deep. More like slipping in and out of a shallow dream, caught between rest and retreat. The fever had weakened him, hollowed him out, yet his breath had steadied, and the color in his lips had returned, just barely, as though his body had started to remember how to live. The man sat near the stove, carving a dry peach with a folding knife, his fingers sure and unhurried. Every so often he glanced at the window, where a sliver of light outlined the edge of a soldier's silhouette in the distance. He was thinking, not with panic, not with fear, just the quiet arithmetic of someone who knows there are only so many moves left, and each one cuts deeper than the last. The boy stirred behind him. "You ever cross a river and think it'd wash you clean?" the boy asked. The man didn't turn. "No, I thought it would," the boy said, his voice a thread unraveling in the warm, close air. "After it happened, after they ran and I got hit, I fell into one. Didn't mean to. The water just took me. Thought I'd die there, float like driftwood, but when I came out the other side..." He paused, as if listening for something. "I thought I'd be different." He sat up, propped on his elbows, the blanket falling to his waist. Sweat clung to his hair, dark at the roots. But I still remembered everything, every sound, the way the man yelled when they shot him, the way his wife screamed after. It didn't go anywhere, not even a river can take that. "Maury." The man stood, walked to the basin, and poured a little water over a rag. He didn't speak as he handed it to the boy, who pressed it to his neck. "They wanted the ledger," the boy said after a while. "That's all. I didn't know what it was. Just some names and numbers and a seal. Government stuff, I guess. They kept saying it'd change everything, that it proved something. Some land deal, rail contract, blackmail, hell, I don't know." The man finally spoke. "You know where it is now?" "Gone. I buried it in the arroyo near Elk Ridge, under the bones of a dead cow. Don't know if they found it." He looked toward the window, then back at the man. "Doesn't matter. Even if they did, they won't believe I didn't tell them first." The man took this in without change. Then he picked up the bread knife and began slicing again, his rhythm steady. "I was never supposed to be part of it," the boy whispered, as if the act of speaking made him smaller. "They were just men passing through. I fixed a shoe on one of their horses. Thought they'd leave. They didn't. Stayed 3 nights. Third night they came back bloody and smiling, handed me a sack with the ledger in it, said I was in now, said if I told anyone, they'd come back and dig up my sister." The knife paused in the man's hand. "They knew about her," the boy continued, eyes glazed with memory. "Didn't even ask me. Just said her name like it was already buried with her bones. That's why I ran." Silence swelled around them like heat. "You could give them a name," the man said at last. "Tell them who really took it." "They won't listen," the boy said. "To them, I'm part of it. Might as well be the one who pulled the trigger." The man didn't argue. Some truths outlived justice. Outside, a single bird crossed the sky, its shadow skating over the dry ground like a ghost running ahead of the body. The wind shifted, carrying a different scent now. Sage and iron and the faintest trace of sweat and leather. The man looked toward the soldiers again. One had stepped forward, not far, just a pace. Enough to break the line, enough to change the rhythm. The man stepped outside, hands empty, and leaned against the porch post. The soldier, younger than the others, face still smooth, didn't move further. He only raised a hand, palm up, in a gesture neither hostile nor friendly, an invitation or a request. The man didn't respond. The soldier let the hand fall. He turned slow and returned to the line. The man went back inside. The saddlebag was ready. Inside, hard bread, salt, a flask of water, an old compass. The revolver had been wrapped in a scrap of deerskin and tucked into the bedroll. The man fastened the leather ties, then hoisted the pack over his shoulder and carried it to the horse. The boy came to the door, one hand bracing against the frame. He watched the man cinch the saddle with tired eyes. "I don't even know your name," he said. The man didn't answer. "I guess it doesn't matter." The horse snorted softly, shifting its weight. The boy looked out toward the soldiers. "If I ride out, they'll stop me." "Maybe," the man said, "but if I stay, they'll come in." He turned to the boy. "You ready?" "No." The boy shook his head. "But I think that river's waiting for me again. And I think next time I got to walk in on purpose." The man adjusted the cinch strap one last time. Then he took the boy's arm and helped him down the steps. His legs were shaky but held. At the edge of the yard, they paused. The soldiers didn't move. "You're going to walk me out?" the boy asked. The man nodded. They walked slowly, not out of fear, but because there was no need to rush. The world was holding its breath. Even the sky felt thin above them. At the fence line, the man stopped. The boy continued alone, blanket still draped over his shoulders, head held just high enough to seem brave. As he reached the edge of the road, the soldiers parted, not fully, just enough for one horse and one rider to pass. They didn't lower their rifles, didn't raise them either. Their eyes were flat, cold, but curious. The boy mounted with effort, then turned back once, only once, to look at the man. The man gave a nod, barely there. The boy turned the horse forward and rode slow, straight down the road, into the quiet heat of the plains. The soldiers closed their line behind him, but they didn't follow, and the man with the outlaw stood at the fence, arms at his side, watching until the boy was gone, his eyes unreadable, his body still as stone. Behind him the house stood open, empty, and somewhere, beneath the cracked bones of the land, the river waited. Evening came like an apology, soft, slow, and without defense. The light turned copper, then bruised violet. The sun pulled low behind the hills, and its dying glow stretched the shadows of the house, the fence, the man himself, until they seemed like echoes of something long gone. The road lay empty now. The soldiers had vanished without sound or smoke, no hoofbeats, no orders barked, no trail to follow, just gone, as if the line of blue had never been more than a memory conjured by fever and regret. The man remained at the fence long after the boy had disappeared into the distance, watching the road as if it might unwind itself in reverse and bring the child back. The horse, still tied by the porch, stirred but did not whinny. It, too, seemed to understand that something had ended, or changed, though not loudly. The wind shifted. A distant coyote called once and was not answered. The man turned back toward the house. He moved slower now, each step deliberate. Inside, the fire in the stove had gone cold. The coals lay dull and gray. The air smelled of sweat, dried blood, and the bitter tail of boiled coffee. He didn't bother relighting the flame. The dark came on its own. He picked up the cup the boy had used. A faint ring of blood still marked the lip where he'd drunk. The man washed it with the last of the water from the tin basin and set it back on the shelf upside down next to its pair. Then he sat. The old chair creaked beneath him, and he let it. He didn't light the lamp. The dimming twilight that filtered through the warped slats of wood was enough. Dust hung in the air, catching the last light, like gold powder shaken loose from the bones of the world. On the table before him was a folded piece of paper, a page torn from an almanac or maybe an old ledger. The boy had found it that morning half tucked under the stove, used long ago as a patch for a gap in the floor. On it, someone, not the man, not the boy, had drawn a map in pencil, a river, a name, Miriam. The ink smudged where it had been handled too many times. The boy had run his fingers over it when he found it. She was real, he'd whispered. The man picked it up now and stared at it for a long while. Then he folded it again, smaller, tighter, until it fit in the curl of his fist. He didn't burn it, didn't throw it away. He just kept it. Outside, the wind picked up again, and not loud, but steady. It moved across the plains like a hand brushing through tall grass, not searching, just remembering. He stood, crossed to the doorway, looked out, and there, under the growing dark, was what they'd left behind. Not the soldiers. They had taken their footprints with them. Not the boy. He was already past the next ridge, or maybe further. What remained was the outline of a moment, the shape of a standoff that never became violence, a choice that never spoke its name. Like the ring a wet glass leaves on a table. The man stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked underfoot. He looked out across the emptiness. Then he walked. Not toward the road, not after the boy, but around the house, past the well, past the chicken wire long since fallen to rust, to a patch of earth where the grass had never grown back. It had been trampled once, long ago, by boots now lost to time. Beside it sat an old wagon wheel, half buried, its spokes broken like ribs. He knelt there, dug into the dirt with his bare hands, slow, steady, and found it, a locket, rusted cold and filled with dust, no picture inside, no name. He held it for a moment. Then he closed his fingers around it and stayed there, kneeling in the dim light, the horizon behind him turning from fire to ash. Night fell fully. The stars appeared without ceremony. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. The revolver still sat on the shelf, wrapped in deerskin. The boy's blanket was folded on the cot. The saddlebag that once carried bread now sat empty near the door, waiting to be packed again or never touched. The man walked inside and shut the door behind him. For a moment he stood there, just stood. His hand rested on the doorframe. Fingers splayed against the grain of the wood like he was taking its measure, or letting it take his. Then he crossed to the cot, sat down, and leaned back. He did not sleep. He did not pray. He just listened, to the wind outside, to the creaking of the roof, to the silence that had returned now that the soldiers were gone and the boy had crossed whatever river waited beyond the ridge. In the dark, the locket hung from his hand, swinging once gently, then still. Out on the plain, the dust had begun to settle, not quickly, not completely. Just enough that the shape of the road returned, soft-edged and uncertain, like a path remembered in dream. A lone rider moved along it, hunched slightly, steady in his pace. No gallop, no chase, no fear. Only the quiet rhythm of hooves against earth, as a boy rode into whatever came next. No one followed, and no one watched, except the land itself, which remembered everything and said nothing.